Amateur Radio Basics. It is December 4th, 2022. My name is Ann Forrest. I am a 8-year resident of Seattle, so sort of a newcomer still. I am heavily involved in the Emergency Communication Hubs in Seattle, which is an all-volunteer organization working through the issues of helping our communities support one another after a large disaster. The Emergency Communication Hubs stand up when communications go down. I also volunteer with the Office of Emergency Management. I teach a lot of classes for them. So we are going to get started. Oh, my background, I'm a Navy nurse. I did that for 20 years. I homeschooled our son for 8 years. We moved to Seattle and I've just been doing lots of volunteer work. I am not a professional in this at all. I just enjoy teaching. The benefits of amateur radio, and this is very much from my perspective. Everything is colored by my interaction and my work in disaster preparedness. The benefits of amateur radio is that it works when all other communications are down because it is not dependent on the internet being up and running, and is not dependent on cell phone towers being operational. So they are really good in disasters. You hear about ham radio operators especially being really, really helpful and useful after disasters all over the globe. So huge benefit of amateur radio. And it's fun. I mean, if you're a techie kind of person at all, it is a very interesting field to get into. There's tons to learn. It's lots of science, lots of physics, technical building stuff. It's a very interesting group of people that are typically involved in radio, amateur radio. So great fun. And there's so much you can do with it. It is very much community building. It is not a hobby you do alone. Typically, you are talking to someone. There is community building going on. It is not something you do absent of other people's. And then also community sport. There is a whole field of folks out there, a whole community of people out there that go out into sometimes remote places and offer community support. There's runs around Mount Rainier. So you've got all these amazing athletes out there doing it for fun or sport or whatever. And there's a whole team of ham radio operators that are on the ground supporting them, providing that communication in those areas where there's no cell phone signal. They're checking in with runners and making sure that everybody's getting the first aid they need. And so there's lots of community support operations that make good use of ham radio. The city deploys a lot of ham radio operators during community events here in Seattle, like big pride parades and those kinds of big events. They're used all the time in support of community. I am going to ask you to learn 3 new words. The first one is repeater, and then simplex and duplex. The repeater is how folks talk to one another using radio frequencies around things like buildings and hills and big things that make it difficult for radio signals to reach from radio to radio. So it is, I think of it like a cell phone tower. It's probably not, it's probably much more complicated, but I think of it like a cell phone tower. The person on the left sends out a signal. It is caught by this repeater and it is forwarded on to this person on the other side of the hill in this example. So that's what a repeater is. It just takes that signal and forwards it out. So I will use the word repeater quite often, so you need to understand that one. And then simplex and duplex. These are very complicated words for a very simple thing. Let's look at the top. Simplex is a very simple way of communicating. It is basically antenna to antenna. This happens to be a person with a radio to a person sitting in a car with a radio. But it's the same as if 2 people each of them had a radio and they're talking to one another. The signal is just going from radio to radio. There's nothing in the middle. It's called simplex because it's really, really simple. This is what walkie-talkies do. Walkie-talkies don't use something like a repeater. You have to be able to see the person with the other radio in order to be able to talk to them. Simplex is radio to radio. Duplex, we are talking through this middleman, not that there's a man there, it is literally just a tower with an antenna on the top of it. But duplex is when we can only talk if we have this middleman helping us communicate. So simplex and duplex. So those are the 3 words you have to learn. Repeater is just that tower, very similar to a cell phone tower. that forwards your signal on and allows you to reach people that you wouldn't normally be able to reach. And simplex is just when you're talking radio to radio, no repeater in the middle. And duplex is when there is a repeater in the middle. Amateur radio is broken up by frequencies and the power range of the radio. They take the band of radio frequencies and they divide it up into these, what I'm going to call 3 sections. And each of them is called something different, and they don't overlap one another. So they all have a different band of frequencies, a different piece of the radio spectrum. There is the family radio service, FRS. There is general mobile radio service, GMRS, and there's ham radio frequencies. So again, we've taken this whole big spectrum of radio frequencies and we've divided it up into 3 pieces. And we've assigned these names to them, and then you buy radios that can use those frequencies. So FRS, GMRS, and ham. Let's talk about family radio service first, FRS. It is for a very short distance. And I'm just going to say they're powerful walkie-talkies, and they're not even that much more powerful than the walkie-talkies you had as a kid, if you had them. I hope you did. You can only talk to somebody that's about a half a mile or less away. You have to have what's called line of sight, which means if I had good enough, sharp enough eyes, I could see that person. They may be a half mile away, but I could see them if my eyes were good enough. It's not talking through walls or buildings or through, big hills or anything like that. So less than half a mile. And the only thing you can do is talk. You cannot send like digital messages. We'll talk about that a little bit. You can't do anything else on these FRS radio frequencies. So again, they're like fancy walkie-talkies. General mobile radio service, GMRS, you have longer distance. You still kind of have to be able to see them. You have to sort of have line of sight, but they can be a little bit further away, 1 to 2 miles. So you can be a little bit further apart with GMRS. You can still only talk. You can't send emails or digital files or pictures or anything else. You can only talk. But general mobile radio service radios, GMRS radios, can use repeaters, so you can get much further than that 1 to 2 miles. So we've gone from FRS radio, which is really just a walkie-talkie and can't use repeaters. We've bumped up to GMRS radios where you can use repeaters. So your reach has grown considerably. And then there's ham radio.
Can I ask a quick question about GMRS before we move on?
Absolutely.
I bought two radios after a little emergency thing they did in the Roosevelt, in the Calvary Temple parking lot not too long ago. And what I'm looking to do is talk to someone that's up on Capitol Hill with GMRS radios. And I was under the impression that through programming a repeater in there that you can do that. That's correct, right? That's
absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We'll get into much more detail about that. But yeah, so ham radio, it's about a 1 to 2 mile reach if you're just talking radio to radio. But you can send much more than just your voice using ham radio waves, using that frequency band. You can send pictures. You can send, like, I'm not going to go into the details, but you can send an email, basically. If somebody could send me an email to my Hotmail address using their ham radio. So you can send pictures, you can send text, you can send files. It's much more powerful. So as you can tell, we're going from FRS, which is really simple, to GMRS, which is a lovely middle ground, to high-tech ham radio, where you can do a lot of really cool, technical, helpful stuff. With ham radio, there's many more repeaters available, so your signal could get around really, really well, and you can talk to Russia. That's how Puerto Rico talks to the United States is through ham radio after a hurricane is what I'm talking about. So you can talk to Russia. You can bounce your radio signals off of the atmosphere and all kinds of stuff. So ham radio is definitely the most powerful. We're going to talk about what these things are good for. Family radio service, FRS, very short distance. Because it doesn't use repeaters, you can't get very far. So basically, they're kind of toys. They're very fun toys. They're very helpful if you're in a large crowd and you're afraid you're going to lose your kids. Sure, give them, buy a pack of family radio service radios and play with that and see if you can't communicate. If you don't want to use cell phones or whatever, they're very fun, but post-disaster, they're not super useful, especially if, like, you're in Seattle and there's hills. General mobile radio service is very useful at the community level for longer distance and over hilly terrain in Seattle. So you can talk to other communities, Glenn, like your example about being able to talk to Capitol Hill. You can talk to other communities, but you can also talk within your own community if you have line of sight issues. If there's hills, if there's big buildings, if there's lots of stuff in the way between two people trying to talk, you can talk on a GMRS a lot easier in your community than you can on an FRS radio. And then ham radio, man, the possibilities are just endless. This is one of the ways that the city will communicate amongst themselves and with people like us, the community, after a disaster, is using ham radio operator, because it doesn't depend on the internet being up and working or cell phone signals, cell phone towers being working. So ham radio works when everything else is down, which is why it's super good in a disaster.
Okay, question on that.
Yeah, sure.
A repeater looks like a tower to me. And so technically, in an earthquake, that tower could come down?
Yes, it could. GMRS repeaters that are up, and I'll show you a map of them in a bit, they were put up with the idea that they will last through an earthquake. They have battery backup, and they are very firmly mounted. They were put up with the idea that we want them to be available after a large earthquake. Does that help?
Along those lines, if ham radio is the best and has maybe the fewest limitations, why do the GMRS in an emergency and not the ham?
Yeah, I'm going to get to probably 80% of your questions. So give me just a bit and we'll get there. And
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So we are going to ignore family radio service. They are lovely, but from a disaster standpoint, they're not all that useful. And let me explain my interest in GMRS radio. I live in Northeast Seattle and I work from home. My husband works in Beacon Hill. My husband is in the medical profession. I don't expect to see him immediately after a disaster. A, because he's going to be needed at work, and B, because we're on a typical day, we're pretty far apart as far as miles. And it will be a long walk for Andrew, my husband, to walk to our house and meet up with me. It will take a long time. I fully expect him, if the earthquake is big enough, to walk. So I would like to be able to talk to him when he's in Beacon Hill and I'm in Northeast Seattle. I'm in the Lake City area, basically. So for that, for my purpose, which is being able to communicate with my partner after a disaster, GMRS works very well for us. Family radio service would not work. I can't see Andrew from where I am. So FRS is not going to cut it, which is why the purposes of this discussion, I'm just going to ignore family radio service. It's out there, but after post-disaster, it doesn't have a great deal of use. So we're going to concentrate on GMRS and ham radio operators and ham radio. I'm going to compare ham radio and GMRS radios. So is there a test to become an operator? For the ham radio, there is a test you have to take. I don't know all the details. I think there's a bank of 126 questions, and I think the test is 64, something along those lines. That detail is not pertinent for right now. I have taken the test, the ham radio test, myself, my husband, and my son, who was 16 at the time, took it. We all three passed the first time we took it. It is not an easy test. They will teach you how to take the test. They teach to the test. And there's lots of places you can take the test. There's lots of people that offer help passing the test, and those are free. Our class to take the test was to prepare for the test was free. The test is not free, but preparing for it is free. But they teach to the test. So I got my license, I passed the test, got my license, and had no idea how to talk on the radio. So that for me is very disheartening, I guess. You just have to know it going in up front, and you have to be able to push past that. So to talk on a ham radio, you have to take a test and you have to pass it. GMRS radio does not require that. Is there a license? Yes, you have to be licensed by the Federal Communication Commission, whatever FCC stands for. You have to be given a license by them. The cost for the license is currently the same price for either kind of license you get. It used to be different. It's now the same as of a couple months ago. So $35 will cover you for 10 years. The license for a ham radio operator only covers that. It doesn't really actually cover the person. It covers the radio, which is a very odd concept, but it covers the radio. So if you and your partner both want to be radio operators and you want to be able to communicate, and one of you is in North Seattle and one of you is in South Seattle, you both need a license. The GMRS radio license covers the family. So we have one GMRS radio license for all three members in my household to be able to talk. So, obviously it's a little bit more expensive if everybody in your family has to have their own license, if you're doing the ham radio. The cost of beginner radios, not that much difference. There's not a huge difference between the two basic radios you might start with. And the radio range, again, if you're talking simplex, radio to radio, no repeater in the middle, the range is about the same. Again, you have this information, so you don't have to write it down unless you want to, but this is some of the reasons, some of the differences between the two. If ham is so much more powerful and so much more capable, why wouldn't you go with ham radio? I find GMRS radio more approachable. Part of it is you don't have to take the test.
To earn your technician license, your basic license requires passing one examination totaling 35 questions. Radio theory, regulations, and operating practices. Questions and answers are available online. And the 35 test questions are pulled from a pool of 412 questions. So you need to be able to answer a chunk of that 412 because you don't know which questions they will pull out and put on the test.
You might want to start with the GMRS radio aspect and graduate to ham radio, maybe get really into it. There's tons of people that have done that. So what to consider when trying to weigh these two options, it really is, what is your end goal? Who do you want to talk to? My situation is I wanted to be able to talk to family members after a disaster. It doesn't help you to get your ham radio license if the person you want to talk to is your sister-in-law in Ohio, because she needs one as well. She needs a ham radio license. So it's, who do you want to talk to? Is this something you want to do for fun? Then I would totally convince you to go into ham radio, because there's so much more you can do with it. If you want to be able to send pictures to Russia, any of that kind of stuff, if you're serious about disaster preparedness, I would definitely get into ham radio. If you want to play on a bigger scale, definitely ham radio is the way to go. If your goal is just to communicate with family members post-disaster, GMRS will get you pretty darn far. It's who do you want to communicate with? If you want to participate in the Iditarod, it's ham radio. If you want to talk to somebody in Russia, it's ham radio. I'm going to talk about the GMRS radio that I recommend. And I will give you information about buying this radio if this is what you want to do. This is the name of it. It doesn't matter. It's BTEC GMRS V2. You can program stations, which is very cool. So you can modify the radio to how you want it to look. You can use GMRS repeaters, which is certainly important. And also on this particular radio, you can listen to ham radio frequencies. You can't talk on them, but you can listen. You can listen to people's conversations who are talking to one another using ham radio frequencies. With the BTEC, the radio that I recommended, so we have a cheat sheet. That's all I'm saying. This cheat sheet only works for the BTEC radios. It wouldn't be as helpful if you bought a different model of radio.
When you say we, who are you referring to?
Sorry, we as in the Emergency Communication Hub Network. All of these volunteers in the city of Seattle, many of them are on the call. I recognize lots of names and faces on the call. We are dedicated to standing up after a disaster to support our communities. And we, for the most part, have all bought the same radio so that it's very, very easy to communicate. When I say go to channel 30, let's see, channel 31, Puget Sound Repeater Group, everybody knows that everybody would turn their radio to channel 31 and we'd all be listening to the same ham radio operators talking. So we're all trying to use the same radio so that we can program the same way and we all understand how they work. Talking about GMRS radios, this is where the 4 GMRS repeaters are in the Seattle area. So there's one up in Maple Leaf, there's one in Magnolia, there's one in Beacon Hill, and there's one in Seattle, West Seattle. These are up and running all the time. Pretty much, I don't know that there's any dead spots in Seattle with just these 4 repeaters. I don't think there's a place in Seattle where you can be and not be able to reach one of these repeaters. With these 4 locations, you can talk to anybody else in Seattle. You could talk to folks within your own community, around the block, through buildings. Maple Leaf can talk to Beacon Hill, who can talk to Magnuson Park, who can talk to Capitol Hill. There's lots of communication capabilities because of these 4 repeaters. I'm going to hit the items that I haven't hit yet. So the benefits of amateur radio is always on my mind. It is the disaster preparedness. I want to be able to talk to my household post-disaster. The difference between ham and GMRS, I gave you the graph, the chart, whatever. It's really, what do you want to do with it? Who do you want to talk to? Pros and cons. Yeah, there's pros and cons to both. Pros of ham is that the world is your oyster. The pros of GMRS is that I think it's a little bit more approachable. Yeah, how to get your license. I'm not going to go through it because I have it all documented on a handy dandy sheet and you can follow directions and click the links and all that kind of stuff. I am happy to answer questions if you get stuck on how to get your license. How radio operators can help post-disaster, I think I covered that enough. It is really just about, you either want to communicate with your household or you want to help your community and your neighbors. And you can do both of those with the same radio. You absolutely can. It's not one or the other. But that's how we help post-disaster. To go more into this is a much longer conversation about the emergency communication hubs and how we are positioning ourselves to support our communities post-disaster. The gist of it is we are the help until help arrives. If Seattle does have a large earthquake, it will be incredibly disruptive to all of our normal services, our electricity, our natural gas, our water, our telephones, our ability to drive. All those things are going to be messed up. And there's only so much the city can do post-disaster, especially in those first couple weeks, because they are hindered as much as we are, and there's only so many firefighters and police and ambulance drivers on duty in Seattle at one time, and they can't instantly, increase that number of people on duty. So we are the help until help arrives. Your neighbors are your help until help arrives. So that's how we step in to help post-disaster. Programming your radio and how to practice with your radio. If you want to mark your calendar, we have designed 2 programs. These are the same thing. Saturday the 25th and Sunday, March 5th. It's the same program. We're just offering it twice to hopefully accommodate as many folks as we can. We will program your radio for you and we will help you practice. We will make your radio look like everybody else's in the city that has this same kind of radio, and we will get you talking on the radio so that you walk away feeling comfortable. There is so much benefit in this. I cannot express how helpful this will be to you.
Is it going to be ham radios as well as the GMRS radios?
It is just GMRS.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because ham radio is very different. So I'm gonna talk briefly about programming your radio. So GMRS radios, you can program them one of 2 ways. You can do it on your radio. It is me pressing a bunch of buttons and knowing how to put in the frequency, and I'm going to call this one PSRG, Puget Sound Repeater Group, and it's going to be channel 115, and this is the frequency. And oh my goodness, my brain just blows up. I don't want to learn how to program my radio. There is great value in learning how to program your radio. So I don't want to downplay it, but I'm lazy and I don't want to learn how to do it. So this radio can be programmed in literally 5 seconds with a computer and a special cable. And that's what we offer. I do this for lots of folks after classes like this. If you want to get a group of people together and you all buy the radio that I recommend, I can meet you in a parking lot somewhere and program your radios quickly. I can't do that for all of Seattle, but I can do it for lots of folks. And those 2 dates that I showed you, that's what we plan on doing. You hand me your radio and you've written your name on the back of it, so I'm not mixing it up with somebody else's. You hand me your radio and then you go off in the other room and you learn more about GMRS radio while I sit over here and program your radio in 5 seconds. Again, programming your radio, you can do it the hard way and learn a great deal, or you can do it the easy way and it's 5 seconds and a computer and a special cord. And I'm not recommending that you guys learn how to do the computer 5 seconds special cord. I'm saying let somebody like me do that.
Hey, Anne, is there a chance that your programmed radio gets unprogrammed?
That's a good question. No, not that I know of. I mean, maybe if your battery was dead for a really long time, it might not be stored in there. That's a really good question, Brandy.
Because it might be worth it to learn how to do it if you're going to, like I was thinking about being the person for a emergency hub, probably that person should know how to do it.
Well, and it's outlined in the book that comes with your radio.
Okay.
It's just doing it one time and then going 6 years and never having to reprogram it again because you didn't need to. I would never remember how to do it. I would have to pick up the book and do it. I think more than anything, it's the volume. There's just so many channels. And obviously you don't have to do them all. You can do the top 50 and ignore the last 150. So there is, yeah, Brandy, you're right. There is great value in learning how to program your radio. I've been playing with radios for about 4 years now and I have never programmed it myself. And I have, and I've played with them quite a bit. So, and if I had to do it, I know I could, I just don't want to learn.
Quick question. I have the BTEC GMRS V1 and I've had it for, and you programmed it. And
yeah.
It's still as valid as the V2?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So this is actually a V1. I don't have a V2 yet. I don't need one. My V1 still works. We are going to reconfigure all of those channels. We're gonna monkey with them a little bit, and you will get the most up-to-date version in that February and March class. there's been some changes, and we've figured out a little bit smarter way to do it. So we're hoping to get all of the hub captains using these GMRS radios to all be the same thing. So when somebody says, "Hey Duffy, go to channel 47 and you'll be able to hear blah blah blah," we need to know that my 47 and your 47 are the same thing.
So bring the the GMRS V1 and get it reprogrammed.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it'll be just fine.
Yes. It'll be
Okay.
good for probably another 5 years.
Thank you.
I'm going to go through some of these questions. Can you talk about MERS? I don't know much about MERS. I think it is fairly close to family radio service, where it is not repeater capable. That's my understanding.
MERS radio, multi-user radio service. MERS radios use 2 watts of power. GMRS radios use up to 50 watts of power. More power means a longer range. Also, MERS radios cannot use repeaters. They can't hit repeaters, so they don't have the same range as GMRS or ham radio. And as an aside, not all GMRS radios can hit repeaters, can use repeaters, which is why one of the capabilities you want your radio to have is you want it to be repeater capable, which the one we recommended is definitely repeater capable.
Somebody asked, to communicate with emergency hubs, does that require a ham radio? Yes and no. We are, as an emergency communication hub captain, I am constantly looking for ham radio operators to sit in my community and talk to other ham radios outside of my community. So I would love a ham radio operator. Within my community, we're going to be using GMRS. So you don't need to be a ham radio operator to communicate with an emergency communication hub. GMRS is probably going to be more reliable, that somebody will be on the other end being able to talk to you. Again, you kind of have to pick your radio based on who you want to talk to. From Benjamin, you mentioned that generally free ham radio classes teach to take the test. Do you ever? I do not have a recommendation on how to get the information you really need. In the radio world, there's such a thing as an Elmer. It is kind of like a big brother that teaches you how things really work. So I can definitely put you in touch with somebody that would love to sit down and geek out with you and talk ham radio. I'm not that person. There is a completely separate organization. It's called the Auxiliary Communication Service. You'll hear us talking about it, ACS, Auxiliary Communication Service. These are folks that are background checked and they are on call, sort of, as volunteers to the Office of Emergency Management. They are dedicated, amazing folks that really want to help their communities post-disaster frankly, at a higher level than the hubs. The Auxiliary Communication Service radio operators are the ones that are going to be helping the Office of Emergency Management talk to Utah. They're way up there managing communications at a very high level. Those are the folks that you would talk to about, hey, I passed this goofy test, but I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't even know how to turn my radio on. I don't know the protocols. There's a rhythm to how to talk on a radio. You don't just get on there and start jabbering away. You have to say your call sign at certain points in your communication. You have to start with it. You have to end with it. There's protocol. There's like etiquette. The people to teach you that radio etiquette are ham radio operators. And I can get you in touch with one of them. I am not one of them. I can teach you how to talk on GMRS radio, which is a little less formal, I think. Yes, you can purchase the radio on Amazon today if you don't have a license yet. Get your radio, start working on your license, because it does take a couple weeks. When I send out the recording from this and the slides from this class, I will send out all the links to buy radio stuff. Get your radio if you truly are interested. Get your radio now and start working on your license afterwards. With regard to the licensing piece, there's two things you have to do. You have to get an FCC number. It's actually an FCC registration number. You have to get an FRN. So you have to get that number first, and then you have to apply for your license. So it is a two-part process. So get working on it, but don't hesitate to buy your radio now. Part of the reason that I'm offering this class now is that I think it's kind of a cool Christmas gift. I love you. I want to be able to talk to you post-disaster, that kind of thing. Let's see, what's the furthest from Seattle we can contact using GMRS? I'm not 100% sure. Tiger Mountain, I know I've heard people call in from Tiger Mountain. I don't even really know where that is. I know Renton. I know, I think I've heard Everett. One of the things that's interesting about GMRS radio here in Seattle is there's a small group of people that every Monday night at 8 o'clock, they get on their radios and everybody can call in. It's like a party line kind of. Everybody calls in, and what you're calling in, the reason you're calling in is it helps you to actually pick up your radio and use it more than once in a 3-year period. So you stay a little bit more knowledgeable and comfortable with the radio. So picking up your radio once a month, a couple times a month, whatever, is a great idea. But the other thing you're doing, other than just staying familiar with your radio, is you're trying to see who you can hear. Let's say it's the first Monday of the month and we're gonna use the Maple Leaf repeater. So let's see who can communicate using this Maple Leaf repeater. And then the second Monday of the month, we're gonna go to the West Seattle repeater, and we're all going to try communicating using that tower. Oh, so there's a chance to use it, and then you would get a better idea of who you could reach. If you do have a specific question, like one person in your household is up in Everett and the other person's in Renton, if you want to send me that kind of question, I can forward it to the folks that would know immediately. They know this stuff. I don't. Do we need the GMRS license before the in-person class? It would be most helpful. For one thing, it gets you used to saying your call sign. This is a piece of tape that I put on the front of my radio, and that's my call sign. So because when you talk on the radio, you talk like this, antenna straight up, and just hold it in front of your face. So I'm talking and I can say my call sign without blinking. It would help if you had your license before the class, because I've got a feeling people are going to be sticklers. The people that are more formal about this are going to be sticklers, and they're not going to want you to practice on the radio, on the radio frequencies if you don't have your license. And it gets you in the habit of saying your call sign. So I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm skewed towards GMRS. I am. I will be honest. It is a much easier sell for me, but I think it is also a fabulous gateway drug to becoming a ham radio operator and really getting into this and, supporting the Iditarod or Iron Man in Hawaii or whatever. It's a really nice way to get into it. It's a kind of a gentle way if you have folks that aren't super techie. I would say it's probably easier for kids because they don't have to take the test. Again, my 16-year-old took it. It was a struggle. It was not easy. There's 7-year-olds that can take it and pass. So it's not impossible, but they are teaching to the test.
This is Jackie. I just have a couple of questions. I used not walkie-talkies, but I was with the CERT group and we had radio communications. We were able to communicate with the police department. And there was a protocol. We had to turn on the radio, and then we called an incident commander and gave who we were, and then we waited for a response. Is that the same thing that you would do with the GMRS? How could you give us an example of you were going to call your husband and you have to be on a particular channel?
That's a really good question, Jackie. So what you're talking about, you being able to communicate with the police, is a different radio band altogether. It's 800 megahertz or something. I don't know exactly what the title is, but it sounds very formal because you are calling into a very formal organization. GMRS and ham are a little less formal than that. So it's a little different radio system, but this is how my conversation would go with my husband. First of all, we have determined he has a radio in his office in Beacon Hill, and I have my radio sitting here. We have practiced, so we know which repeaters we need to use in order to talk. I can't talk directly with him. I can't do simplex. We're too far away. But we know that there are 2 repeaters between he and I that we can use to talk to one another. So on my radio, I turn it on. Channel mode. And you can't hear this because I've got my earbuds in, but so I turn on my radio, I plug in 028, which is repeater channel 6. That doesn't matter. And I press the button, the push to talk button, and I just say, hi, this is WRFW 815, and trying to reach Andrew Forrest in Beacon Hill. Do you read? That's what I would say. And he's either listening and picks up the radio and goes, yeah, Ann, I hear you, or he's not. So I'm going to have to do it, enough times for him to be around the radio and listening to it. One of the values in our system is that these are mobile radios. I am not hooked to my house. He is not hooked to his office. When he leaves the hospital in Beacon Hill and starts walking home, he's taking the radio with him. We are hopefully going to be able to communicate his entire walk home.
But now when you say who you are and who you're trying to reach, can other people also hear that information, or are you on a specific specific frequency, or?
Only one person can talk on the repeater at a time. So basically what I do is I tune into channel 028, which is one of the repeaters, the Maple Leaf repeater. And I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to listen. If anybody's currently talking, I'm going to let them talk. Okay. I don't have the right to break into their conversation. But when nobody's talking, okay, I'm going to speak up and just see if Andrew happens to be listening on the other end.
Okay.
So potentially in a disaster, you could have 500 people waiting to talk.
Yeah. If there's 500 people, hopefully they're spread out. Hopefully they don't all need the repeaters. Hopefully they can talk simplex, without a repeater. But yeah, the repeaters will get busy. We are encouraged to keep the conversation short. This is not the time to chat. Really pass important information and get off and let somebody else use it. I don't honestly know how busy they're going to be because I've never lived through a disaster, and certainly not on a radio. So yeah, it'll be a bit of a zoo. You have to wait your turn. Ham radio operators do it all the time. They handle that busyness much better than we do, than GMRS operators. Duffy, you've had your hand up for a while. What's your question?
Yes, when you send what you're sending out after this session, will it include how to be part of the Monday night practice?
Yes, a piece of paper I'm going to send. It is titled How to Get Your GMRS License. So step 1 is get that FRN number. Step 2 is get your radio. Step 3 is practice. And down here, it's very small print, I'm sorry, but keep your skills up by checking in with other GMRS operators on Mondays at 8 p.m. The first, third, and fifth Mondays, we start on repeater number 1, then move to repeater number 6. Second and fourth Mondays, blah, blah, blah. So this describes that ability to practice. How long would the radio battery last during an emergency? I think I just saw 18 hours somewhere. These are extra battery options. If you are lucky enough to have a car and it's not needed after a disaster because we're not driving anywhere, you take your battery out of your car, you take it in your house, and you hook these alligator clips to your car battery. This ends in a cigarette lighter ending, what you would find in your car. This second device, the middle one on the left-hand side, has a cigarette lighter plug, and this block right here is a battery for your GMRS V2 radio. So these are just different battery options. You can buy an extra battery, you can use your car battery and charge it. There's battery backups. There's all kinds of ways to keep this thing charged post-disaster.
I wanted to just get one of these radios to listen to the ham part of it. You would still need a license, and here again, just to start playing around with it and getting used to it.
You do not. I don't think there's anything. I'm going to say you don't. I'm probably breaking a rule because I don't know all the rules, but I can't imagine that as long as you're not talking, I can't imagine that you're going to get in trouble listening. So yeah, I think it's an option.
Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. Take care, guys.
You too.
Bye-bye.